Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, commanders of the Corps of Discovery, are leading one of the most epic journeys in American history. Guided by science and driven by courage, they've overcome countless dangers on their years-long quest to reach the shores of the Pacific Ocean. But having left the Missouri River to travel overland, their hope of success now depends on the aid of a friendly Indian tribe. And after weeks of vainly seeking one, Lewis is on the verge of making contact at last.
Oh, hold on, you. I think we've got one. Looks like Shoshone. A young scout on horseback.
Lewis may be the first white man this Shoshone has ever seen. Any threatening move could turn first contact into conflict.
Proceed slowly.
But in this critical moment, Lewis is making a potentially deadly mistake.
Tababon! Tababon!
Because the Shoshone word he thinks means friend actually means stranger, or even enemy.
Tababon!
Looks like Whitecaps on the right up ahead. Let's hug that left bank.
Lewis and Clark is the American story. It epitomizes the things that we do great. Cooperation, courage, indomitable spirit. This is America at its best.
They had a sense that the nation's future, the nation's destiny, hung in the balance based on their success, and nothing was going to stop them.
In April of 1805, Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery is starting the second year of its epic journey to the Pacific Ocean. The expedition is heading west from their winter camp at North Dakota's banded villages and is entering uncharted territory.
When Lewis writes about leaving Fort Mandan, he compares himself to Columbus and Captain Cook. Lewis was quite aware that he was walking off the map of the known world, and he wrote heroically about this. We are now about to penetrate a country at least 2,000 miles in width, upon which the foot of civilized man has never trodden.
The expedition includes 33 men from all walks of life and one remarkable woman. Sacagawea is a teenage Shoshone woman who will play a critical role in the expedition's success or failure, even as she carries her 2-month-old son on the epic journey.
Her own history had been a tortured one, captured as a child, taken back to the East, sold as a child bride to a French fur trapper. Now she was going home, and she knew it, and she knew the way.
Lewis and Clark will need Sacagawea's help finding something that might not even exist, a water route connecting the Mississippi River with the distant Pacific Ocean.
Lewis and Clark were looking for a way that the trade of America could be carried by water all the way to the Pacific.
There's gotta be a river that takes you right out there to it. That's what they were thinking. All we gotta do is find it.
The expedition follows the greatest land deal in history, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which added 800,000 square miles of new territory to the United States. This vast new region stretches from the Mississippi River to the Rockies and from Mexico to Canada. But in 1805, this immense territory is a complete mystery. Believed by President Jefferson to contain natural wonders, including a mountain made of salt, giant sloths, and even woolly mammoths.
When Jefferson begins planning for a Western expedition, he had already traveled to the Pacific in his mind. but he needed to have someone on the ground actually see that country.
President Jefferson drafts his own personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, to explore this new territory and record every discovery in minute detail.
Jefferson drafts a letter of all of the things he wants Lewis to do while he's on this Western expedition. And Lewis realizes after reading that letter that somebody has to be in charge of the men and the boats because there's no way he can do both. So he thinks back to his time in the military and he remembers his acquaintance, William Clark.
Clark handled most of the personnel issues. He was good with the men. He was more tolerant than Meriwether Lewis, less full of his own authority, but less burdened by the command than Lewis was. Lewis was the one who had to answer to Thomas Jefferson.
Lewis was a real intellectual, smart as a whip, had an inquisitive mind. Clark was the adventurer. Clark was the real soldier, and they made a perfect team.
And although Clark is technically a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, Captain Lewis insists he will be the expedition's co-captain, sharing command in every way.
I think Captain Clark's got it from here. How would you gentlemen like to do a bit of exploring?
Lead the way, Captain.
Lewis and Clark have detailed orders and a mission of historic importance. But the essence of their task is perfectly simple.
Let's get out there, you guys, find out what we just bought. We don't even know what we just spent all that money for. Go out there and find out.
The expedition will follow the Missouri River towards its unknown source. But because they're carrying a year's worth of supplies, far more than any pack train of horses could conceivably carry, they must travel by water against the current of the river.
They're moving 60,000 pounds worth of baggage against the current of the Missouri River. Back-breaking labor, all accomplished with the backs and thighs of these extraordinary young men.
With all this snow melt, I suspect the going's only gonna get tougher before it gets easier.
Might be so. But look at it this way, Meriwether. I'm getting the hard part out of the way. Come back downriver in the fall. Feel like a pleasure cruise.
If we're back here this fall,
You doubt we will be?
the closer we get to those mountains, the less confident I am.
The captains had been hoping to average 25 miles a day. But contrary winds and a relentless current have slowed their pace to barely 10 miles before stopping each night.
Lewis said the sand was getting into absolutely everything, into their food, into their eyes. It was getting into all of their guns and equipment, and he fell nearly into despair. What if the wind never stops?
And on June 3rd, a totally unforeseen obstacle threatens to slow the expedition even further, or worse, send it off course entirely.
In early June of 1805, they come to a place that we call Decision Point. The stream on the left at Decision Point was clearer, and the river on the right was muddy just like the Missouri. And when they got there, they couldn't really know which was the true Missouri and which is the tributary.
Indians said that there would be one fork before the Great Falls. This is the second.
Memories fade, Meriwether. That's why they call it exploration.
Now they face a daunting puzzle. Which river should they follow?
They were quite concerned that if they made the wrong choice, that they would ruin a whole season of traveling, and it may even jeopardize the entire expedition.
So, which way do you reckon is the right one?
And the expedition's captains can't conceal their indecision from their men, who have strong opinions of their own.
Everyone but the two captains believed that they should take the right turn
Boys seem to be in agreement on that right fork. I'm not so sure.
Nor am I. It seems quite a bit narrow, it looks to me.
Yes, and muddier. Whereas that left looks fairly clear, like it's come right down out of the mountains.
Still, I don't think we should discount the opinions of the men out of hand. It could be that they understand something that we don't.
Well then, what would you suggest?
Why don't we scout them both? You take the left path and I'll go right. Once we've seen enough to render a more confident verdict, we'll meet back here in no more than 3 days' time.
Northern Indians, said to be a pretty fearsome lot. Are you sure you wouldn't rather leave them to me?
No. Don't worry, old man. Let the younger lads take this one.
It's a risky choice. Exploring both forks requires splitting the expedition, with no way for the separated elements to communicate if they run into trouble.
So Lewis takes a few men and travels up the North Fork. Clark takes a few men and travels up the western flowing fork.
Until now, the expedition's been favored by good luck. But just when they're at their most vulnerable, Lewis finds himself literally hanging on for dear life.
Get over here!
While scouting the fork of an unidentified river, Meriwether Lewis is abruptly reminded just how dangerous the wilderness can be.
Captain! Shields!
By sheer luck, Lewis is carrying a pike with him that day, which he uses to anchor himself against the cliff.
Pull! Get over here! Come here. Pull!
You good, okay, Captain?
Much obliged, gentlemen. That'll teach me to tempt fate, Hornet.
I don't see how you can avoid it, Captain. We tempt fate every day.
Despite his brush with death, Lewis immediately continues exploring the north-running river, hoping to learn whether it trends towards the Rocky Mountains. But with progress so far much slower than expected, time is of the essence.
Lewis said, if we take the wrong one and we have to turn back in a few weeks, it's so late in the travel season that it might dishearten the men. And then he uses this key phrase, it might defeat the expedition altogether. When he says these things, you get a sense of how tightly wound he was and how he really measured his own life with the success of this expedition.
For Lewis, deciding which way to go depends on knowing where they actually are at any given moment. Using a sextant, he measures the angle of the sun at high noon, then references it against the calendar date to determine their position.
That gadget tell you where we are?
It will in just a minute. Now, I have the precise angle of the sun. I will actually be able to pinpoint our precise latitude.
Well, that sure is something, Captain. But can it tell you where to find a herd of buffalo? Now that's the tool we could really use, huh?
Looks to me we're just south of the Canadian territory, about 40 miles or so. It would be good use of our time for you to make meat of that moose, Mr. Shields, since you're so eager to hunt.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir, Captain.
Despite lacking GPS or even a map, Lewis and Clark are able to navigate with astonishing accuracy.
The crazy thing about that was William Clark estimates when they get to the Pacific coast that they had traveled over 4,000 miles. Well, he was off by 40. You know, that's what, 1%? To be 4,000 miles of travel and be off on your estimate by 40 miles, that's pretty remarkable.
Yet even with their accurate surveys and methodical exploration, Lewis and Clark still aren't sure which fork of the river will lead them towards the Pacific.
Sounds like you were almost headed straight north, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, judging by the compass and the latitude readings, yes.
Whereas my route took me due west, southwest, with the mountains in view straight on all the while.
Hard to argue that's not the correct path to take.
It's a decision that could ensure the expedition's success or its utter failure.
Here's what's so interesting about this moment. Everyone but the two captains believe that they should take the right turn.
I understand the popular sentiment among the men is that the Northern River is in fact the true Missouri. But Captain Clark and I have determined that we will follow the Western River from here forward.
Pourquoi? We believe this is the correct course based on its direction, its width, and its clarity. And we will proceed to follow it with all deliberate speed.
Discipline among the ranks has been excellent so far. But if the captains lose the trust of their men, the expedition could quickly fall apart.
Private Cruzat, do you wish to speak?
Yes, sir. I think I can speak for the men here when I say we disagree with your assessment.
Need I remind you, Private, Captain Clark and I are in charge.
You can also agree on this. We will follow you anywhere. Whether approved right or wrong.
The men said that even though they doubted that Lewis and Clark had the right path, they would follow them no matter where they wanted to lead them, that they had that much respect and confidence for the two captains. This was one of the fundamental moments of the expedition, because after that, whenever there was any doubt about anything, the men could remember, back at the mouth of the Marias, the captains did it right.
They had heard about Great Falls, this tremendous falls from the Indians, so they knew if they saw the falls that they would be on the right track.
After naming the North Fork the Marias River after his cousin, Lewis sets out to find the Great Falls and confirm they're following the right course towards the Rockies.
Be careful, Meriwether. Could be getting into Blackfoot country. You really should be taking more men and armaments with you.
Lewis wanted to be the one that got first to the Great Falls of the Missouri and went on ahead with the fewest possible number of men so that he could be the first civilized man there.
Don't worry, old friend. I'll make better time with a lighter footprint. I'll see you at the Great Falls, Captain.
You will indeed.
Two days later, while his men are out hunting, Lewis hears a distant thunder of falling water.
Lewis is overwhelmed with relief that they have made the right choice. He's overwhelmed by the beauty of this breathtaking scene before him.
In his diary, Captain Lewis calls the Great Falls the grandest sight I ever beheld. But Lewis's happiness that they followed the correct river soon becomes concern, because getting the expedition over the falls will be the greatest challenge they've faced so far. For Meriwether Lewis, Montana's Great Falls are the most spectacular landscape he's ever seen. and the biggest obstacle so far in his mission to reach the Pacific. The morning after he discovers the falls, Lewis sets out to see how far the rapids extend.
He went on alone with his rifle and his notebook and his collection bag. And he said, it was so eerie, this experience, that I felt at times that I might be dreaming. But in a way, this is what an explorer lives for. He's gone beyond the boundaries.
So what'd you find out, Captain? Well, not good news, I'm afraid. This is the first of 5 waterfalls heading upstream, and they're all connected by rapids. It'll be a good 15 miles before we can put back into the river.
15, you say?
Maybe more.
Yet the captains of the expedition refuse to be daunted by the difficulty of getting past the Great Falls. And if they can't travel by water over the falls, they'll do so over dry land.
Keep pulling, men! You've got a goalie up ahead. Let's take it to the right, men!
On June 22nd, the portage begins, with nearly every enlisted man pushing and pulling the first wagon over the prairie.
The portage to get around Great Falls was a tremendous task.
Keep pulling!
They cut down cottonwood trees and they put round cottonwood wheels and axles on their boats, and they pulled up for miles across the prairies.
Halt!
But from the very start, the operation goes awry.
Everyone offload. Looks like we got some work to do.
And it was hard labor. The men were so exhausted, they would push for a little while and then they would give out and everyone would just lay down and rest until it was the next time to go. And then they would get up and they would do it again.
Days turn into weeks as the men make repeated trips around the falls and back again. All the while, the Rocky Mountains loom on the western horizon, promising more difficult days ahead.
To go 20 miles took them an entire month because they were moving all their supplies, and it was really difficult work. It was now July of 1805, and they knew that an early winter was likely in the Rocky Mountains, so Lewis was getting very concerned at this time.
Company, aim!
By July 4th, the agonizing portage is finally complete, and the Corps seizes the opportunity to celebrate America's birthday.
A toast to 29 years of freedom from the Brits. Yeah!
The exhausted men enjoy a night of celebration, vowing to reach the Pacific Ocean no matter what dangers still lie ahead.
Did you tell them that this is the last of the whiskey?
Let them enjoy the night. We'll tell them in the morning.
Yeah, it's probably for the best anyway.
But after successfully portaging across the Great Falls, the expedition now faces a new challenge: the advancing calendar.
They had hoped that they could get to the Pacific and maybe even start back in 1805. Now they were just hoping they could get to the Pacific Ocean before winter. They did not want to get trapped in the mountains because they would perish.
And as they approach the headwaters of the Missouri, they'll soon be forced to travel over land until they cross the Continental Divide. And even as his men celebrate, Lewis knows their fate will depend on skill, nerve, and more than a little luck. By midsummer of 1805, the Corps of Discovery prepares for their next major challenge, the Rocky Mountains, which await them to the west. But as the broad Missouri River grows shallower by the day, Lewis and Clark face the fact that it won't carry them through the mountains. And from now on, their progress will depend on horses they can only acquire from an Indian tribe that may or may not be friendly.
They were no longer on the Great Plains. They couldn't follow a river through the mountains, that they were going to have to find a new path. And none of it was going to be possible without horses.
This is the critical thing. Lewis is aware that the expedition will be made or broken on the basis of a successful encounter with the Shoshone. Because if they can't meet the Shoshone and don't get horses, they're going to have to either turn back or spend the winter there in hopes of a contact the following year.
But the Shoshone, like every other tribe along the upper Missouri, remains stubbornly elusive.
I'm beginning to wonder if the Shoshone even exist.
Oh, they're out there. Probably sizing us up from the shadows.
We know that there was native people all along those rivers. They just didn't want to be seen.
But just as Lewis and Clark start to worry they may never find the Shoshone, they get some much-needed good news.
Chandon says that this place looks familiar. She used to spend summers here as a child.
Is that so? Well then, won't be long now, will it?
Yet despite reaching Shoshone territory, the tribe refuses to reveal itself to the expedition. As the expedition approaches the wide but shallow headwaters of the Missouri, pulling their boats upstream becomes nearly impossible. With the expedition nearing a standstill, Lewis resolves to make contact with the elusive Shoshone, no matter what the risk.
These were bold, tough men, but they were wearing down. Everyone's spirits were down, supplies were low, the situation was really getting desperate.
Lewis clearly understood that this was the make or break moment of the expedition.
Now take good care of yourselves, gentlemen. We still have a long way to go.
If the Shoshone wouldn't deal with them and sell them horses, then the expedition would probably collapse, and Lewis was not going to let that happen.
Yet at this critical junction, Lewis suffers a rare lapse in judgment and leaves Sacagawea in the camp.
Why didn't Lewis take Sacagawea with him on this reconnaissance? She speaks Shoshone. She was born Shoshone. She's brought along for the precise purpose of negotiating with the Shoshone for the horses. That moment has come, and Lewis leaves her behind.
Knowing the success or failure of the expedition hangs in the balance, Lewis proceeds with elaborate caution.
They began to see some signs in the land that this was a place that was occupied.
Oh, hold up, you. I think we've got one.
And then they see a Native American on horseback.
It looks like Shoshone. A young scout on horseback.
Lewis approaches slowly, presenting as little threat as possible to the lone warrior. But one of his men still hasn't seen the Shoshone horsemen in the distance.
What are they doing? Don't they see we stopped? Tamabon! Tamabon!
Lewis is calling out a Shoshone word that he's learned from Sacagawea.
Tamabon!
He said, "What should I say when I meet these people so they'll know that I'm their friend?" And the words that came back to him were something like Tababone. Sacagawea couldn't think of a word for friend or white man, and so this is all he had. Well, we now know that Tababone means stranger and can mean enemy.
Tamabon! Tamabon!
Double bone!
The horseman appears to be intrigued or curious, but on one side of Lewis is John Shields, and Shields keeps moving forward.
Shields! Double bone!
Lewis can see that the horseman is very much unnerved by whatever's going on this flank.
No! No, wait! 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 Double bone! Double bone!
And so at a certain point, he whips his horse and turns and gallops off over the hill.
Shields! Are you blind?
It's a heartbreaking moment, but what follows soon after is even worse. As their search for the Shoshone continues, Lewis climbs a ridge where they can actually see the Rocky Mountains in all their grandeur.
There had been a notion, and Jefferson was part of it, that the Western Mountains would be essentially symmetrical with the Appalachians, that they wouldn't be that high, there wouldn't be that many ranges of them.
They're used to the Appalachians, where the mountains are 4,000 feet high as a tall mountain, and they figured they're just over this rise, we'll head down the other side.
Oh, my.
But they kept going up and going up and going up. He called them these tremendous mountains. And when they get to the top and they think they're going to see downslope, it's more mountains.
A bit different from Kentucky, eh, Capitan?
It certainly is, George. For better or worse, it certainly is.
Now, for the first time, Lewis sees with his own eyes exactly how daunting the path ahead will be.
You're getting into the mountains. Like, you're talking about places where you could have 12 feet, 15 feet of snow. It becomes like impassable. But if you decide to not go for it, then you're stuck for the whole winter until next May when it melts enough to get through. So you got like a window of opportunity, and it's just a bold move you got to make.
Two days after his long-distance encounter with a lone Shoshone warrior, Lewis gets a second chance.
It looks like Shoshone. A family, maybe.
They come up over a little knoll, and they see three women.
This was the critical moment. This was the make or break moment for the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Let's move in. Leave your guns. Thank you.
Having bungled his first attempt to contact the Shoshone, Lewis knows this encounter is even more important, and it may well be his last. After 4 anxious months, the expedition of Lewis and Clark has finally contacted the Shoshone Indians.
Lewis clearly understood that this was the critical encounter of the expedition. They had to have horses to get their baggage across the Rocky Mountains. Now Meriwether Lewis gets to say the thing that every explorer longs to say: take me to your people, through sign language. And so off they go, these 4 white men and these 3 Shoshone women, and they're moving off towards whatever Shoshone camp is nearby.
Lewis must now establish trust with the tribe, who have had almost no contact with white men before.
Up over a ridge comes mounted Shoshone warriors, Lewis said armed from head to foot, and they're galloping right at this little party of 3 natives and 4 white men. This is the climax of the first great year of travel, 1805.
We move. Montanay. Go, baby, show.
Stay here.
They had to have been a little apprehensive. The Corps of Discovery didn't know if the native people were going to be friendly, if they were going to attack them.
The Shoshone leader was a man named Kamiawait, and Kamiawait got down off of his horse, and he walked into this ground between the 2 groups, and Lewis offered him his hand.
This is a moment of high tension. 4 white men hoping to make a sign of peace.
Kamiawait treated him with caution, but he also recognized that he had provided some trade goods to the women, and so fortunately for Lewis, he was able to convince Kamiawait that they were friendly.
Aye. Aye. Lewis said he snugged me up tight against him, and he repeated the following words, "Ahai, ahai," which Lewis said he later learned mean, "I am much pleased." And Lewis said the tension was broken with this.
What the expedition discovered when they were effusively hugged by the Shoshone people is that once you've entered into their circle, now you're part of their family.
I present this to you as an emblem of peace. This is a symbol of the bond of union between us.
And so indeed, communication was opened up, gestures of friendship were made, and this moment of incredible danger passed, at least for the time being.
Being accepted as friends by the Shoshone is a crucial achievement, and it comes not a moment too soon. But the challenge that will determine the ultimate success of the expedition still lies ahead.
For Lewis, the beautiful thing he sees is not only the Shoshone people, but the horses that they're riding.
George, can you give a message to the chief?
Lewis must now convince the Shoshone to trade for their most valuable possessions, their horses.
I'd like to invite them back to meet the rest of our men and to show them the tremendous trade goods we have to offer for them.
And if he can't persuade them, then all of the effort and risk of the past 4 months will have been for nothing. By mid-August, William Clark's flotilla is fast approaching waters too shallow to navigate.
Just a few more days of this, boys. You'll be the first men to conquer all of the mighty Missouri.
It's been a week since Meriwether Lewis set out to find horses they need to replace the boats. And if Lewis doesn't return with horses in tow, the expedition will grind to a halt.
Oh, Captain Clark! Look! It's Captain Lewis! He's found the Indians and the horses!
This is a historic moment of contact. Many of these Shoshone have very likely never seen a white man before, let alone an entire company of them wearing strange clothes with strange scientific instruments. It's one of these archetypal moments of worlds colliding.
Captain Clark! It's so good for you to finally join us.
You look well, Meriwether. Half expected to find you starving in the range by now.
No more than usual, Captain.
I see you finally found them. Quite the affectionate lot, aren't they?
Indeed.
Later that day, in his official role as President Jefferson's emissary, Lewis offers a formal treaty to the Shoshone tribe. The historic moment faces just one problem. Lewis doesn't speak Shoshone, and the Shoshone don't speak English.
We've been sent by the chief of the 17 great nations of America to inform you that you are now under the wise protection of the great new father, Thomas Jefferson.
Nous avons été envoyés.
To communicate his message, Lewis first has it translated into French by Private Cruzat.
Grand-père Thomas Jefferson.
Well, now communication is open. The chain of translation is pretty amazing.
From French, Toussaint Charbonneau translates the message into Hidatsa.
Awahero, Margui Duash, Shiri.
And finally, Sacagawea translates the Hidatsa into her native language, Shoshone.
And in this way, two sides engage in beautiful, if tortured, communication.
And when it comes to Sacagawea, she looks up. She's been sort of looking down and being very shy and deferential up until now. She looks over at the leader, Kamehameha, and you can't make this sort of thing up.
Hey, Bobby. What's up, Bobby? Bobby. Bobby.
She recognizes the chief. It's her brother. In all the vastness of the American West, in this new and unknown country, they have actually stumbled upon the family of Sacagawea.
She's been gone now for a decade. No one ever expected to see her again. Everyone assumed she was either dead or not coming back. Sacagawea bursts into tears. Lewis said it was deeply affecting. It was a very emotional moment.
I've had this jacket since the Whiskey Rebellion. It's seen me through many a tough winter. I'm honored to gift this to you, Chief Kamehameha.
Uh-huh. Ahi. Sacagawea helps broker one of the most consequential treaties in early American history. Lewis and Clark convinced the Shoshone to exchange 29 horses for some trade goods and a promise of more trade to come. Having overcome one of the greatest obstacles of their epic 2-year journey, Lewis and Clark lead the Corps of Discovery, now traveling on horseback over the Continental Divide. Lying an unknown distance ahead are the shores of the Pacific Ocean, the final objective of their extraordinary adventure.
As they went across the Rocky Mountains, they had very little idea what to expect. They knew a few things from talking to the Indians, but much of it was really unknown.
But nothing was going to stop them. Not the river, not the rapids, not the waterfalls, not the towering mountains, not native resistance. Nothing was going to stop them from reaching their goal.
It's difficult to overstate the significance of the Lewis and Clark expedition, not only for their time, but for the subsequent generations of explorers who would be inspired by their journey.
I think all the men on that expedition understood that what they were doing was something that nobody else could do again.
Throughout all of the difficulties and dangers, through all the obstacles, they were able to succeed where others had failed.
Keep pulling, men!
And this perseverance just kept coming forward because we want to get back to share our story. We want the people of America to know what we have accomplished here.
Guided by the stars, Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon have spent 4 years charting a boundary line through hundreds of miles of unforgiving wilderness.
Vega is coming into view.
Mrs. McLean, is that you?
Now, their ultimate goal is finally in sight. But they have ventured deep into the territory of the Lenni Lenape tribe, and they are not welcome.
These lands are our lands, and we will defend them with our lives.
Face to face with a band of angry Lenape warriors.
Sir, there's no need to make threats.
Mason and Dixon may have reached the end of the line. The Mason-Dixon line is famous as the physical and philosophical dividing line between North and South. But the epic story of the men who drew that line remains largely untold.
Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon were unlikely frontiersmen, and that's because the two of them were 18th century nerds.
Charles Mason worked as an astronomer, taking observations of the stars to create charts and
tables for navigation.
Dixon, on the other hand, was more of a practical on-the-ground surveyor.
Sending astronomers and mathematicians into the wilderness may seem improbable to us today, but if there was a job to be done, it took men of great skill, knowledge, and learning to do them.
Mason and Dixon had no experience with the grind of the frontier before they came to North America. It had broken many men much tougher than they were. But as Tom would show, they were up to the task.
Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon come to North America from Great Britain with their heads literally in the stars.
Not a cloud in the sky.
Don't speak too soon, my friend. The wind could shift, and we have a long night ahead.
Can't put a wager on that.
Why would we want to profit from something that would make our job more difficult?
Mason and Dixon had just returned from a voyage nearly halfway around the world to observe where Venus would pass between the Earth and the Sun.
And they are hailed almost as celebrities amongst the kind of scientific community at the time.
Ready. A little to your left. A little to your right. Yeah, perfect.
We don't normally imagine people like this becoming the heroes of the frontier, but that's precisely what happens with the two of them. And that's because of a major territorial boundary dispute.
Pennsylvania and Maryland have been arguing over their borders for over 80 years, with each laying claim to a huge swath of territory.
For the people living in this disputed territory, it becomes a little more serious when you have tax collectors from Pennsylvania knocking on your door, and then tax collectors from Maryland the next week asking for money too. So there are very real consequences here. People have died because of this conflict. And if it isn't settled, it's only going to get worse.
The British government creates a border commission to define the boundary once and for all, and they hire Mason and Dixon to survey it.
American surveyors simply didn't have that expertise. So that's when Mason and Dixon came riding in like superheroes and said, yeah, we can do that.
The Mason-Dixon line isn't just the famous east-west line between Maryland and Pennsylvania. They also have to survey the border between Maryland and Delaware, which was once part of Pennsylvania's territory.
It's a north-south line that goes from the southwest corner of Delaware to the north up toward Pennsylvania, known as the Tangent Line.
Surveying the line is a massive undertaking, putting Mason and Dixon in charge of a small army. Overseeing everything is the expedition's steward, Moses McLean.
Good news, gentlemen?
We won't know until I finish the calculations, but all signs indicate we are perfectly aligned.
We should be ready to commence survey by tomorrow.
That means a busy day ahead for me. Not to worry, though. Everything will be shipshape for departure.
Attempts by colonial surveyors to mark the tangent line have all failed, but Mason and Dixon believe they could succeed by letting the stars be their guide.
Mason and Dixon were about to do a geodetical survey. This is a survey where you use the stars as a point of reference.
Please make sure this is very secure. Yes, very good, very good.
To accomplish this, they are employing the most cutting-edge astronomical instruments.
The serious weapon was a zenith sector. And this was a 6-foot-long device that allowed them to look up into the sky, read stars, and determine exactly where they were in terms of latitude. And because it was quite fragile, it had to be protected.
Oh, Medusa, you had the most important job. Should anything happen to this instrument, this entire expedition is for naught.
Now, Charles, you're putting the fear of God into Mr. Brent here. You know Mr. McLean only hired the finest crewmen. Our precious cargo's in good hands.
I suppose you're right, yes. Oh, but please do be very careful. Yes, thank you, gentlemen.
Mason and Dixon form something of an odd couple. Mason is more conservative. He's a family man. He does things by the book.
Dixon, much more man about town. He enjoyed the pleasures of life. You could say he was much less responsible.
But they both have this love of astronomy and mathematics, this desire for perfectionism and precision that make them the perfect team for this job.
The two scientists are eager to begin their grand expedition, but they have little idea what awaits them in the wild.
Bit more. Right there.
Using a star in the constellation Ursa Minor as a reference point, astronomer Mason sets the course for each day's work. And surveyor Dixon lays out the line on the ground.
The standard piece of equipment for surveyors at the time was the Gunter's chain. It was 66 feet long, and 80 chain lengths would be a mile.
Pull it tight. They had to try to keep it as tight as possible as they're measuring from end to end, and they would put a stake in the ground at the end of each chain to measure the next one and the next one and the next one.
After Mason and Dixon marked the line with stakes, workers placed stone markers every mile, many of which are still in place today.
Gentlemen, the first of many links.
Let's continue.
Right away.
Very good.
Right away.
So day after day, they would observe the stars at night and project that line down to the ground and follow a continuously straight line for that 80 miles.
As spring turns into summer, the expedition slowly, meticulously makes its way north, one chain at a time, through both trackless wilderness and small settlements.
Mason and Dixon's expedition was jumping into an area that was already very politically contentious.
Another mile down, my friends. Anyone care to join me in a celebratory lemonade?
There were people who wanted nothing to do with them because their property lines would be shifting between colony to colony, and there's a very good chance they weren't going to like the outcome.
Those gentlemen do not seem in the mood to celebrate.
Do you think they have some sort of grievance to being moved to Pennsylvania?
It wasn't long ago surveyors coming through here were lucky to escape with their lives.
Surely they must know we're impartial servants to the king. Tomorrow, sir. Jeremiah Dixon at your service.
So impartial as Mason and Dixon were supposed to be, you have a kind of skepticism about the ability to ever resolve this.
Perhaps it'd be best we'd be on our way. All right, let's move forward.
Despite the doubts of some locals, Mason and Dixon are on schedule to finish surveying the tangent line by winter.
Quickly. It's clearly too far for the chain.
But when they hit the Nanticoke River, the expedition grinds to a halt.
They had to find a way to measure across. The Gunther's chain was 66 feet long. They didn't have a 600-foot long Gunther's chain that they could measure across the river.
Do we know what methods our predecessors employed?
They gashed.
I beg your pardon?
Yeah, they saw what you saw, so they just gashed, forged ahead.
Mr. McLean, our work is based on mathematics. We will not guess.
Oh, of course not, sir.
Previous surveyors simply guessed at the distance in front of them. But for two men who were modern men of science like Mason and Dixon were, guessing was simply not an option.
So what do you plan to do?
But if they can't come up with a solution, their expedition will go down as one more failed attempt. Astronomer Charles Mason and surveyor Jeremiah Dixon have undertaken a task that has proven impossible for everyone who's attempted it.
It's clearly too far for the chain.
Marking the border between Maryland and Delaware, known as the Tangent Line. But they've already hit an obstacle that could stop them in their tracks, the Nanticoke River.
The problem with the Nanticoke River is that it's wide and deep. It's not something that you can drag chains through.
No hurry, of course. We could break for an early lunch. Plenty of shade beneath those trees.
Oh, wait, the quadrant.
Pardon?
What do you have in mind? You'll see.
The river is far too wide to measure by the traditional method with their 66-foot-long surveyor's chain.
They took their duties very responsibly. They knew what had gone wrong before. They knew that they were going to be evaluated by the Royal Society. If they'd made any mistakes, it would have been common knowledge and their careers would have been damaged.
Dixon believes he can use a navigational instrument called Hadley's Quadrant.
Hadley's Quadrant, it was similar to what a sextant would be for a ship captain to use to measure the vertical angles between the star and the horizon.
So normally the Hadley's Quadrant would be used vertically, and what they did was they turned it on its side.
Placing men on the far shore to measure a baseline, they use the Hadley's Quadrant to determine the angles from point to point, enabling them to calculate the distance across the river.
596 feet and 7 inches. Now we know.
It was an ingenious breakthrough which allowed them to move along through swamps and over rivers in terrain that otherwise other surveyors would have looked at and gone, well, it looks like about 230 feet.
Mason and Dixon's advanced methods are proving themselves so far. But as they push north through the summer and fall, the pressure to hit the bullseye only grows.
Charting the line to reach the tangent point, something that all previous attempts had failed at, is the first real test for Mason and Dixon. It's a test of their methods, and it puts their commitment to perfectionism into play. If they don't do this, there is no Mason-Dixon line to follow.
On November 10th, 1764, the final mile marker of the tangent line is set. The task that many believed to be impossible is complete.
Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
All right, gentlemen, we have much to be proud of, but we must not rest on our laurels. A new challenge awaits come spring.
Tangent line is a significant accomplishment. These are men doing something that had never been done before. So it's a big moment, and it sets them up for an even larger task, moving west.
In 1765, Mason and Dixon begin stage 2 of their survey, marking the over 200-mile-long border between Pennsylvania and Maryland. It will take Mason and Dixon deep into the wilderness, but due to a recent decree by King George III, their line must end at the Appalachian Mountains.
King George drafted the Proclamation Line of 1763, which said it was illegal for white settlers to pass over the mountains and to settle in Indian country.
But 4 months into the survey, Mason and Dixon are still 100 miles from reaching the Proclamation Line.
The east-west line is a significantly more complicated undertaking than is the tangent line.
One of the biggest challenges is that they have to clear a path through the wilderness before they can measure the line.
So they had a team of axemen working ahead of them and behind them as well, opening the initial passageway and then widening it. All the while, Mason and Dixon are doing incredibly complicated astronomical calculations for every mile they would go.
The expedition is falling behind schedule, and Mason and Dixon are feeling the pressure.
Ah, very good. When you're finished, come find me.
Did you not see this?
Ah, good morrow, gentlemen.
That remains to be seen, Mr. McLean.
The commission is not letting up. They insist we complete our survey by winter.
Winter? The terrain to the west is supposed to be even more treacherous.
The difficult terrain is only one of Mason and Dixon's problems. Their scientific process requires precise calculations based on observations of the stars.
Every time they had to stop to take the observations, they had to hope that the stars were visible. If it was cloudy or raining, they wouldn't be able to make their observations. It just delayed things more and more.
I could put in a request for more men, but...
Our problem isn't one of manpower, Mr. McLean. I've tried to explain to them that to do this job correctly, we must follow the stars. And you cannot hurry the stars, Mr. McLean.
The commissioners that oversaw Mason and Dixon's team made it very clear that time was money, but their calculations had to be precise for any of this to matter. And they weren't willing to sacrifice their professional integrity or their intense commitment to science.
But just as the pressure to speed up grows stronger, the weather takes a dangerous turn.
Seems you won't be in the observatory tonight.
Alas, it's as if the clouds are conspiring against us.
Oh! Guys, in the tents!
Well, that came on quite quickly.
But this is no ordinary storm, and it could turn the entire expedition upside down.
Is that hail?
The instruments, are they protected?
You can only imagine how helpless Mason and Dixon must feel at this point. They are intense. There's enormous chunks of ice falling from the sky, and all of this sophisticated equipment is outside in the elements.
As we all know, hail, glass, not a good combination.
The observatory, it's still intact.
If any of this equipment, especially the Zenith telescope, were to be significantly damaged, it's not like there's telescope repairmen out in the middle of the wilderness. It would have been a significant blow to the expedition.
Until I lay my own eyes upon it, I will... Mr. McLean, we were just coming to check on...
The Zenith sector. I ran straight here when the heavens started to open. She's fine.
Mason and Dixon catch a lucky break with the weather. The expedition continues west, but they only make it to mile 117 before they are forced to shut down for the winter.
This task is larger than even they could have anticipated. But as much as they now recognize the scale of the task ahead of them, they are confident that when the spring comes, they'll be prepared to finish the job.
5 months later, Mason and Dixon resume the expedition, only to come face to face with the frontier's most daunting obstacle.
Locals call it Sidling Hill.
It appears the locals have a sense of humor.
The expedition had learned to deal with trees, they've learned to deal with ravines and valleys, but when they hit Sidling Hill, certainly a mountain, it's going to be physically the greatest obstacle they had faced yet.
There's a narrow gap to the south I can take the wagons through, but it appears I shall be going mountain climbing.
With a mountain standing in their way, Dixon and the survey crew must confront the most dangerous conditions they've seen yet to keep the survey on course.
The terrain is very difficult. I mean, it's very steep and it's rocky.
Let's tighten that chain.
Oh, be careful.
Everything that was a challenge previously was quadrupled, and all the while they had to maintain this astounding accuracy, which was very difficult to do so while maintaining your footing.
On the steep slopes of Sidling Hill, an expedition that began with high hopes seems destined to end in tragedy.
Morgan!
Help me! Oh, look out below!
While trying to survey the daunting mountain known as Sidling Hill, the Mason and Dixon expedition may suffer its first casualty.
Oh! Morgan!
Help me! Help!
Stay still, we're coming down!
Coming on!
Hold on. Pull me! Pull me!
All right.
Luckily, no one is hurt. But the danger moving forward remains. For the next 30 miles, they traverse one mountain after another until they reach the very edge of the frontier. On June 14th, 1766, the expedition arrives safely at the foot of Savage Mountain, 165 miles from their starting point.
Gentlemen, would you do us the honors?
Ready?
Perhaps I should ask that of you.
Oh, please, Charles. I am a surveyor. I never miss. Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
Mason and Dixon are eager to continue, but if they go any further, they would be illegally crossing King George's proclamation line.
At that point, they would be trespassing onto Indian territory, so certainly that could mean that the party could be attacked.
They had not reached the western limits of Pennsylvania and Maryland yet, so they knew that the line extended beyond that.
They do want to finish their job. They don't want to be stopped by politics, so it's frustrating for them to have to pick up at that point and stop.
Despite their frustrations, Mason and Dixon have achieved something once thought impossible. But as they return to Philadelphia, they learn their expedition may not be over yet. After months of negotiations, Mason and Dixon receive permission from the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Six Nations, to cross the proclamation line.
The Six Nations are extremely powerful. They are large in number and they claim a lot of territory.
Gentlemen, my name is Charles Mason, and this is my partner, Jeremiah Dixon. And on behalf of His Majesty the King and the colonies of Pennsylvania and Maryland, we welcome you and thank you for allowing us to continue our work.
We are tired from our journey. We must rest.
Of course, of course. Mr. McLean here will send you to your tents.
Part of the agreement was the Six Nations would send guides to accompany the survey crew.
They would provide protection for them as they extended their survey line.
Hugh Crawford, a seasoned frontiersman and interpreter, serves as the liaison between the expedition and the native guides.
Mr. Crawford, you must be tired as well, but could you spare a little moment?
Of course. We need to discuss issues facing the expedition as we move westward.
And there's much to discuss.
Though the presence of the guides offers Mason and Dixon a sense of security, it does not guarantee their safety.
While the Iroquois Confederacy claimed to speak for all American Indians west of the Proclamation Line, the reality is that many native tribes resent the authority that the Iroquois claim to hold over them.
From Savage Mountain, the expedition moves west, each mile giving Mason and Dixon increasing hope they might reach their ultimate goal, Pennsylvania's western border. And though they mark off over 30 miles without attracting the attention of the natives, at mile 199, Mason and Dixon receive an unexpected visit.
Vega is coming into view.
Jeremiah. Sorry, I thought I heard someone coming. Mr. McLean? Mr. McLean, is that you?
Mason and Dixon may have received permission to cross the proclamation line.
Jeremiah, what?
Jeremiah, what are you? But deep in hostile territory, permission has its limits. Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon have led their surveying expedition into the territory of the Lenni Lenape people. But their welcome is anything but warm.
Does this belong to you?
Yes. Yes, it belongs to us.
I found this while I was hunting. You measure this land, you cut down the trees, but it's not your land.
Native peoples in North America often referred to surveyors as practicers of pen and ink witchcraft, because when they saw measurement tools, when they saw these treaties come out, it usually ended with them losing their land. And when they saw Mason and Dixon coming through, they saw nothing but bad news waiting for them.
King, crossed the big water, sent those men to mark things. He wants peace. He does not want this land.
The Lenni Lenape were fiercely defensive about that land.
And if pushed too far, they were more than willing to fight back, and fight back hard.
I believe you speak the truth. But I will not close my eyes. Be careful when you travel home.
Mason and Dixon's first encounter with the Lenni Lenape ends with just a warning, but it's a chilling portent for their expedition.
Now we know we're being watched.
The local tribes were not willing to give us free rein. They were a bit suspicious of our motives. We had to respect those things, and if we didn't, it could be at our peril.
And tensions rise even further when Mason and Dixon decide to split the party in two to keep the expedition on schedule. Half the crew goes back to clear all the trees along the surveyed line, while the rest push deeper into Lenni Lenape territory.
The advantage of a smaller group is just that you can potentially move faster through the wilderness, but it also leaves you more vulnerable to attack with fewer men to defend your party.
The departure of half the crew brings a growing sense of foreboding to camp, but no one expects what happens next.
Come on, boy! Get it off him!
In a shocking, tragic accident, 2 pack horse drivers are struck and killed by a falling tree.
Moses! My goodness. What happened? Baker and Carpenter. The boys didn't know they were back here.
Make arrangements for the safe transfer of their bodies for proper burial. Immediately.
Yes, sir. Yes, and I will draft up letters for the next of kin.
Forestry work today is probably one of the most dangerous professions, and you can imagine how much more dangerous it was 200 and 300 years ago.
The tragedy pushes a crew already on edge to the breaking point.
At this point, it's compounding the nerves and anxiety that many people are feeling. They're at the very end of their tether.
Never have I been more relieved to be breaking camp. The men are getting restless.
Indeed. Getting back to work will occupy everyone's minds. And we are so close. We have a problem.
After the victims' bodies are sent home for burial, Mason and Dixon prepare to continue westward. But their men have had enough of this job, and they won't take one step further. After a warning from the Lenni Lenape tribe and 2 tragic deaths, a large contingent of Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon's axemen are refusing to go on.
It has come to our attention that you do not wish to continue in our employ. Now, we are on the verge of achieving something momentous. That you do not seek to see it through is a great disappointment. But we cannot compel you to continue. You are free to go.
Mr. McLean, We'll see to it that you're paid for your service. When you turn in your axe.
Mounting fears of an imminent Lenni Lenape attack prompt many of the expedition's axemen to turn back. This is close to the worst-case scenario.
I heard the commotion. It is a significant loss. Our numbers help keep us safe. Going forward, each crew member should have a loaded rifle at the ready.
When you lose that many people, successfully defending yourself becomes almost impossible, and you're left perilously vulnerable.
Will the guides not see this as a sign? Might they possibly follow suit?
These men think for themselves. When they decide they can't go further, it'll be their decision alone, and you will not be able to change their minds. Gentlemen?
Their backs now against the wall. Mason and Dixon's only hope is that their Iroquois guides remain with them.
Ultimately, the expedition can't continue forward without those guides. It's simply going to be impossible from a security point of view.
With the entire expedition now on alert, Mason and Dixon reach Dunkard Creek, less than 30 miles from Pennsylvania's western border. But their guides are getting increasingly nervous.
We'll need to be alert on this next mile. Dunkard's Creek is not far from the Warrior's Path.
Well, that sounds ominous.
Mostly it's a trade route. But for any party seeking to do us harm, crossing it could be seen as an act of aggression.
As they get closer to the Warrior's Path, their guides become more and more anxious about the fact that they are moving into territory that is very hostile.
We'll follow your lead then.
So for the Iroquois that are with them, they know that the most dangerous part of the expedition is still to come.
Despite the potential danger, Mason and Dixon make camp and prepare for several nights of observations.
Oh, such a beautiful night. Makes one feel as if anything is possible. Even something so supposedly impossible as this. Ah, gentlemen, good evening. Come to take in the stars.
Sat in council with my brothers. We have one voice. We will not take one step further.
The Warrior's Path is a line they will not cross. The Lenape have defended their lands with brutal force. They cannot guarantee anyone's safety.
The Iroquois tended to see themselves as above the Lenni Lenape in the hierarchy of native tribe, but hierarchies and power structures mean very little when you're outnumbered in your enemy's territory.
I've witnessed some of your discussion earlier today, and it is clear that you didn't take this decision lightly.
But we are so close. Mr. Hendrick, please. Pennsylvania's western border, we could see them from that bluff just there. If we could just...
As the expedition nears the finish line, once again, the Lenni Lenape appear with a warning.
Good evening. What brings you here?
I am brother to the king of the Lenape people. I have heard stories of your movement through these lands. Our lands.
Prince Piscatawmen is an individual with high standing amongst the Lenni Lenape who has had many, many interactions with the British, and this is going to make him extremely suspicious of what's happening during Mason and Dixon's expedition.
This expedition has an agreement with the Six Nations. Mr. Hendrick can explain.
I know about the agreement. The Six Nations do not speak for me. These lands are not theirs, no, not yours. These lands are ours, and we will defend them with our lives.
After years of struggle, Mason and Dixon have almost reached their goal.
Sir, there is no need to make threats.
But continuing their mission could mean their deaths. Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon's expedition has brought them into the lands of the Lenni Lenape people.
Sir, there's no need to make threats.
But now, the Lenape Prince Piscatoman has come to them with a warning. Go no further.
It is you who threatens us. So you are warned.
We are here only to mark a border between two colonies on orders from our king. We are not here to take your lands.
When borders are respected, peace can grow. I have long hoped to make peace with your king. But clearly, that day is not yet upon us.
The end really sinks in for Mason and Dixon when they meet Piscatoman. The pain in that man's eyes, the sincerity of his statement, really convinces Mason and Dixon that this situation is still very raw.
I thank you for respecting this boundary.
Understood.
You can imagine Mason and Dixon's mindset at this point. So close, yet so far. What sacrifice are you willing to make to achieve your goal?
Science is important, but they do want to get out of there with their lives.
Confronted with the words of Piscatoman, Mason and Dixon know their mission has finally come to an end. With one final marker, Mason and Dixon bring an endpoint to their historic line and their own epic journey.
"233 miles, 17 chains, and 48 links. Not a single link was easy, especially these final few. But we did our job with precision and professionalism.
And with honor. God bless each and every one of you.
Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
Though Mason and Dixon had hoped to survey the line all the way to Pennsylvania's western border, they realize how much they have truly accomplished.
It was one of the greatest surveying feats of that century and probably during the following century, and the accuracy was incredible with all the hardships they had to overcome.
Modern surveyors have marveled at how simply stunning their achievement was. There had to be just a sense of immense accomplishment on their part.
Thanks to them, the border that caused so much trouble for so many years will be indisputable.
May this boundary bring order.
Its political significance settling this long-standing conflict between Pennsylvania and Maryland is crucial to the colonies moving forward.
We did good work, Charles.
And live to tell the tale.
The winds could shift, and we have a long journey ahead of us.
Mason and Dixon, these two Englishmen, were really laying the groundwork for the future development of the West.
In 1768, 5 years after they arrived in America, Mason and Dixon set out to return home to England. But over the next century, their pioneering work will be overshadowed by what it comes to represent.
From the mid-1800s up to the present day, the Mason-Dixon line means something very different. It's not simply the boundary between two American colonies. It's the boundary between North and South. that shouldn't distract us from what the Mason-Dixon expedition was. It's a remarkable scientific achievement, some would say on par with the moon landing, and should be recognized as such.
In the end, the Mason and Dixon story was really a story of perseverance. There's never been anything like it in the history of North America.
Vega is coming into view.
Our technology that we have today is built on the work that Mason and Dixon did. Their understanding and accomplishments helped us to understand the shape of the Earth, and we built upon that work that they did.
Not only are they making a scientific achievement, it was also a social achievement. They were doing a technical job, but that job affected people's lives in a real way.
They created a story that had not been told before. They created this benchmark for what was possible. And that, I think, was probably the most amazing thing that they had accomplished.
Christopher Gist has made his name exploring the wilds of North America for England's growing colonial empire. But in 1753, he faces the greatest challenge of his life, guiding a young major on a perilous mission and returning him safely down the icy Allegheny River. Suddenly, Gist's mission becomes not only a matter of life and death, but one that could determine the course of history. Because this isn't just any man. This is George Washington. Christopher Gist is one of the greatest explorers and scouts of the colonial era, but his importance to American history is often overlooked.
Gist was a remarkable surveyor, scout, frontiersman, and explorer whose detailed records, published long after his death, offered a vivid and comprehensive account of frontier life.
He is really the original frontiersman, going into these Western territories long before any of the people we think of as frontiersmen.
Gist is, in many ways, the embodiment of what we tend to think of as the frontier hero.
In the wilderness of North Carolina's remote Yadkin River Valley, Christopher Gist is a man in his element. Despite his ease at navigating the wilderness, Gist is not born to the frontier.
Unlike many of his much younger contemporaries, Gist was born in one of the largest, most well-developed cities in the American colonies, the city of Baltimore.
Gist amassed a fortune and lost it all when a warehouse storing all his goods burned down. Seeking a fresh start, he moves his family to the North Carolina frontier.
Well, moving to the frontier was not a simple proposition at this time. You literally have to find a new piece of land and start to hack a life out of the wilderness. So it had to be a huge adjustment for the family.
Gist quickly establishes himself as a trader.
Sirs?
Dealing with the Cherokee, Catawba, and other local tribes.
Blankets I bring you are England's finest. Come, feel. Come winter, they will keep you warm as you sleep. Or it can be made into a fine coat for the hunt.
Gist definitely built up a reputation of being one of the white European settlers that different Indian groups could trust.
He becomes a kind of respected intermediary. This is yet another skill that will serve him well in the latter stages of his career when he's called upon to lead less experienced men into the wilderness.
Gist is soon offered an opportunity that could change his fortunes overnight: to explore and survey the Ohio Territory, an expanse of land west of the Appalachian Mountains.
The Ohio Territory comprised all of modern-day Ohio, as well as parts of Indiana, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia.
As the cities on the East Coast grow more crowded, colonists are looking to the wide-open spaces farther west.
The Ohio Company was established in 1748 to explore the Ohio River Valley and to pave the way for settlement.
You must not worry.
Gist is someone who can not only map the uncharted territory, but befriend local tribes to ensure the settlers' safety.
And Gist becomes, in many ways, the perfect candidate. He also has the experience dealing and negotiating with Indians through his trading ventures so that he can approach them sensitively.
The journey will not be an easy one, but Gist sees an opportunity to create a better future for his family and for his country. Working his way across rough, mountainous terrain, it doesn't take long for Gist to realize the daunting task he's taken on.
When Gist comes over the mountain, that's a pretty rugged landscape. There's a lot of hills. The ravines are extremely sharp and deep.
But largely, he's on his own here, trying to get over the mountains and survive.
Nearly a month into his journey, Gist finally descends into the Ohio River Valley.
When Christopher Gist arrives at the forks of the Ohio, it's entirely wilderness. He sees the potential of where two major rivers come together to form this great Ohio River.
Convinced the area would be ideal for settlements, Gist knows he must be cautious as he takes measurements.
Most of the native groups that occupy the Ohio Territory, they have a long experience with being pushed out of their ancestral lands. And surveyors like Christopher Gist are the first sign that that's going to happen.
Indians actually referred to the compass as the land stealer. Gist had to be far more cautious about his behavior when he was in Indian country.
The area Gist is scouted is not far from an important Native American settlement known as Logstown.
Logstown was one of the most politically significant Indian colonies in western Pennsylvania. It was a linguistically and culturally diverse community.
Of course, there were Native American dwellings, but there were also log cabin dwellings built in the French style.
Gist is looking forward to resting himself and his horses, but he also needs to begin reaching out to Native leaders.
Good morrow. Pray pardon, does any man speak English?
What is your business here?
So the people of Logstown are used to seeing strangers, but most strangers say why they're there, and Christopher Gist doesn't.
He has nothing to barter with. That immediately raises some suspicion among the Lenapes, because if he's not a traitor, then why is he here?
What is your business here?
I am simply looking for a place to rest. I have had a long journey.
Kekulaku ashintesi. Wilishikata wiku. Okumuke yuhaki.
No, I come in peace. I'm a friend. Chief Kakawacheki lives here. May I speak to him?
We have heard what you have to say. You must leave this place. Now!
If Gist doesn't make the right move now, his mission could end here, in blood. Explorer Christopher Gist is on a mission to survey the Ohio Territory for settlement.
You must leave this place. Now!
But in the Native American community of Logstown, that mission has taken a potentially deadly turn.
I come in peace. I'm a friend.
Gist was in a truly desperate situation. So, to get out of it, he basically had to tell a lie.
George Crowan. He is a friend. He will vouch for my good name.
George Crowan was a fur trader. He comes to know, respect, and befriend many American Indian tribes.
Luewita na Crowan.
He invoked the name of George Crowan as a way of kind of claiming his friendship and almost claiming his protection.
Crowan is a good man. If he is your friend, you may stay.
Welcome into Logstown. Gist stays overnight, departing the next morning to continue his expedition for the Ohio Company. Over several months, Gist surveys and maps the uncharted Ohio Territory. Always wary of further encounters with hostile tribes.
Gist is informed that there is a French allied hunting party directly in his path, essentially. And he's told in no uncertain terms that if they capture him, he's very likely to be killed.
For a solo traveler, gunshots in the distance are a bad omen.
He knows immediately that this is not a white man's gun. Native people always loaded light. They had to preserve lead, and they had to preserve most especially powder.
Then he saw the traps that they had set. And then he knew this wasn't a situation where he wanted to hang about.
If discovered, Gist will become the hunting party's next prey. Gist knows that one sound could mean his death.
But he's savvy enough, knowledgeable enough to hide and conceal signs of his presence. Successfully complete his mission and withdraw without falling into their hands.
After more than 7 months away, Gist has completed his survey for the Ohio Company and finally makes his way back home. But he realizes immediately that something isn't right.
His immediate thought, where's my family? What happened? It must have been gut-wrenching.
Fearing the worst, Gist sets off in search of news about the whereabouts or fate of his family.
He goes out and he hears that there'd been an Indian attack. 5 people were killed.
When you lived on the frontier back then, you couldn't help but think the worst. So I'm sure that's the first thought that went through his mind, is that his family had been killed.
Gist gets word that his family may have escaped to Roanoke, Virginia. He can only ride north, hoping that the rumor is true.
They'd been displaced because of Indian raiding. As it turned out, his family had actually managed to get away safely.
Gist's first expedition ends with a joyful reunion, but he will soon be called to lead a mission that could determine the fate of the British colonies. With his family safe, Gist returns to present his findings to his employers at the Ohio Company.
It really just provides them with a wealth of information about the territory, the regions, the position of Indian villages. It's really everything that the Ohio Company could have hoped for.
Off the strength of that success, Gist is hired to lead an urgent diplomatic mission into the Ohio Territory. His crucial charge is a 21-year-old major in the Virginia militia, George Washington.
When we think of George Washington, this is the George Washington we think of. The George Washington that accompanies Christopher Gist into western Pennsylvania is one who's younger and more impulsive, prideful, a little narcissistic.
Gist will lead Washington's expedition into disputed frontier territory.
Both the British and the French have legal claims to the land in the Ohio River Valley. The French, meanwhile, have begun to establish a series of forts.
The Virginia governor who claimed this territory sought and received approval from the Crown to demand that the French vacate, and if they didn't, he also had approval to drive them out by force of arms.
Major, there's a creek up ahead. We should stop and water the horses. This is a long climb till we make camp.
I agree. I could use a drink myself.
Washington's mission is both a dangerous and a delicate one: to deliver a message to the French commander at Fort Le Boeuf demanding their retreat from British land.
Dinwiddie, as a governor, has to send someone willing to make this dangerous 500-mile trek through the wilderness. But at the same time, there's a very real possibility that the individual you send is not coming back.
"2 days to Logstown. I'd hoped we'd be further along.
In this weather, on this terrain, we are making good progress.
Yes. But my orders from the governor were clear. Obtain a reply with great haste.
I understand. But if we push too hard now, the horses may fail on the return.
Sending a 21-year-old into the wilderness is not a recipe for success at this time, especially one with very little practical experience in the woods like George Washington.
With so much riding on his mission, Gist hopes to reach Fort Le Boeuf as quickly as possible. But the weather soon brings the mission to a halt.
It is not passable. That little creek? The rains have had their way with it. Too deep to walk the horses across.
Washington's very impatient. It was very heavily pressed upon him to move with all due dispatch to get this mission accomplished as quickly as possible.
We'll build a raft and ferry everything across tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow?
Sorry, we have no choice.
I have been riding since I could walk, and I have crossed countless creeks and rivers.
Major, I do not doubt your horsemanship. But if a pack horse drowns, it will only delay our progress further.
George Washington isn't a man who takes no for an answer.
But to be certain, I shall see how deep it is.
Major, no.
But his overconfidence could spell his doom. Explorer Christopher Gist is guiding a young George Washington to a crucial meeting. But Washington is endangering the mission and his own life with his impulsiveness.
Major, no. Major!
Gist?
Major! I have crossed this creek many times. I have never seen it this high. Our pack horses will drown.
Christopher Gist, he was the perfect person to pair up with a 21-year-old, naive, inexperienced George Washington.
Christopher Gist comes from a similar class, so he's somebody that Washington will listen to.
Major, I understand your impatience, but the wilderness follows its own rhythms. No one man's desire can interfere with it. I have spent my life learning to work with it.
But he's also somebody who is going to have a lot of patience with this hot-headed, hard-headed 21-year-old military officer who is determined to prove himself in this situation. Washington needs a steadying hand, and he finds that in Christopher Gist.
After a grueling 5-day journey, they finally arrive at Fort Le Boeuf, where Washington delivers his message.
George Washington had to deliver an ultimatum to the French. This is our property. You are not allowed to be here. You must vacate your forts and go away.
But the French are slow in responding.
They're stalling. And Washington had to be well aware that the answer is going to be no, we're not leaving. And so he's eager to just get on with it.
Still no word. At this point, it's simply gamesmanship. He's willfully trying to delay us.
From what I have seen, his answer should be clear. And the number of canoes I counted is astounding.
And his arsenal is equally as impressive. Come spring, there will be nothing to stop him from using the river to flood this region with troops and seize control. I must get back to Williamsburg as soon as possible. So that the king may have time to mobilize a proper defense.
Aye.
In those few days, Washington's been going around the fort, essentially spying on what the French have going here.
He's been able, along with Gist, to make some notations on the size of the fort, the relative strength of the bastions, right down to counting how many boats they have available to go down the river in the spring.
The French commander's response is unequivocal. They will not retreat.
That is effectively a declaration of war. It's basically saying, if you want to get rid of us, you're going to have to send troops to do so.
There's no time to waste in delivering the message to the governor of Virginia. But before they can even leave, the mission is dealt a setback.
Major, we have a problem. Pack horses are still too weak. It'll take all we can do to keep them alive for the journey home.
We absolutely must.
The burden on the horses will have to be lightened, of both supplies and riders.
Washington doesn't like this answer. This is where his inexperience starts to come on.
Very well then. Let us waste no more time.
With their horses weakened, proceeding on foot will add precious days to the journey, and the weather is only getting worse.
This is when the weather really gets nasty. This is December. These Arctic storms blow in.
The cold temperatures are making it very difficult to find forage for the animals, and horses need to eat considerable amounts in order to maintain their strength.
Major, we should stop here and make camp. Trees offer shelter from the wind. There's a stream nearby to water the horses.
It becomes a very dangerous situation, but Washington
doesn't want to hear that.
Grab an axe. We'll chop some wood. We'll get a fire started. And... Major.
They're not moving fast enough for Washington. His age and inexperience are beginning to show, and his patience finally bubbles over.
Major! Perhaps you did not hear me. We are stopping to make camp.
I heard you quite clearly, Mr. Gist. What I desire is to deliver this letter to Governor Dinwiddie with great haste. A task that you and I both know is impossible at our current pace.
Major, I must insist the horses are spent.
Mr. Gist, I have followed your good advices at every turn in this journey. I have learned much from you. But now I must insist that you follow my orders. You and I are to continue on our own by the most direct route possible.
So this is a pivotal moment. Washington says, why don't we leave the horses and walk? Let's go by compass bearing.
Going off known trails in these conditions is not something that you are accustomed to.
And I shall become so. The colony's fate hangs in the balance, and crisis demands actions. Ensign!
Now, at a crucial moment in their perilous expedition, the untried young major is pulling rank.
Ensign!
Returning from a diplomatic mission across treacherous wilderness, Major George Washington and frontiersman Christopher Gist are at odds over Washington's insistence to continue their journey alone and on foot.
His horses are weak. They're not moving fast enough for Washington. He's not patient, but Christopher Gist understands that George Washington is making a terrible decision with this order. But he is the commanding officer, so Gist does oblige. Deep down, however, he knows this is a perilous mistake.
Washington has made up his mind, and Gist has no choice but to go with him. Leaving the pack horses behind, Gist and Washington will have to walk nearly 150 miles.
They had to pare down to an absolute minimum, put on what they called Indian dress that were faster, lighter, more maneuverable.
This also is risky because if one of them becomes injured, they're entirely dependent on the other. There's no larger group to help them. There's no horse to carry them.
After covering 18 miles in one day, Washington, unaccustomed to traveling in the wilderness, is falling behind.
Mr. Gist, we have been walking since well before first light. Perhaps,
Major,
we
cannot waste the daylight.
So Washington very quickly starts to realize traveling all day by foot with your provisions on your back through sub-freezing temperatures is a lot more maybe than he bargained for. And Washington now becomes the one who's slowing them down.
There is a friendly Indian village, not far. Perhaps we can rest there briefly.
Oh, that's a relief. What village?
Murdering Town. Come.
They come across this Indian village, which is called Murdering Town. And it's like, oh, that's a bad omen.
Murdering Town is the colonists' name for a small cluster of Lenape villages near Logstown.
They get a small stroke of good fortune near a small settlement called Murdering Town. You know, maybe one of the most ominously named Indian villages ever. There's one Indian who offers to provide them services as a guide.
Major, where we be headed, there be an absence of reason. Only instinct and survival rule there. You must listen to me.
You seek a guide?
It's a generous offer, but we have no need of your services.
What are you doing, Mr. Gist? Our prayers have been answered.
Sir,
We will eat like kings, and I will carry the Major's pack.
Do as you promised, and you'll be well compensated for your efforts.
Major. Follow me.
You must have faith, Mr. Gist. Faith.
Washington seemed to be glad of this offer of support. Gist was far more suspicious, and he was far more wary of this offer of help. And it turned out with very good cause.
They follow their Lenape guide for hours. But even as Washington tires, Gist has bigger concerns.
Gist became increasingly suspicious because it seemed to him that they were heading in the wrong direction, that they were being led astray.
Friend, it is nightfall. We must stop and make camp.
You gotta roam these woods hunting for scalps. We must head for my lodge. It is safe there.
How much further?
Just ahead, only as far as the sound of a gunshot.
Well, they keep walking and the lodge doesn't show up. And so Gist starts suspecting that this is a trap.
Something is amiss. We've been walking north for 3 miles.
North? How would he be taking us north?
I do not know, but I most assuredly intend to find out.
And it's good, perhaps, that their radar started to become a little bit aware now, because things were going to get progressively worse very quickly.
Are you shot? No. Are you?
He missed, but had that bullet hit 10 inches in either direction, we all have different passports right now.
Gist and Washington's guide has turned on them, and he seems intent on finishing them off.
How would he be taking us north?
I do not know, but I most assuredly intend to find out.
On a grueling trek across the wilderness, Christopher Gist and George Washington face an unprovoked attack from their native guide.
Are you shot? No. Are you?
Gist goes after the Indian, and he's ready to kill him.
Don't shoot! I was firing at a deer that flies from the trees.
Do you take me for a fool? You took dead aim.
Please don't.
Gist, no!
Perhaps he tells the truth. The moonlight plays tricks on the eyes.
A man loads a musket ball for one target, another man.
Washington had a certain code of honor, a code of behavior, which didn't really sanction the killing of someone who was at your mercy.
We'll take him prisoner then. And do what? Drag him all the way to Williamsburg?
Now, this puts Gist in a pretty, difficult situation here. How do we resolve this? This guy just tried to kill us, but you want to let him go?
Gist has a fateful choice to make. Do as Washington says and let the man go, or follow his own instincts and kill him.
You are lucky I am not alone. Major, wait here. Now.
Gist spares the guide's life, disarming and releasing him into the woods, but he remains wary of another ambush.
Gist.
Major, he is gone. I will wager my pay he will be back with reinforcements. We must start walking. Now.
And they're able to successfully push through with no rest over several days and reach the west bank of the Allegheny River, where they're presented with yet another challenge.
My hands be frostbitten, yet the river flows.
It's been so cold, they expect the Allegheny to be frozen across solid, and they can just walk across the ice. But when they get there, it's not.
Swimming the river was essentially not an option. Hypothermia would have set in, they would have perished.
The only way to cross the river is to build a raft, but their tools are limited.
Thanks to Major Washington's insistence, they've left the good equipment behind. They have only with them one little hatchet.
Constructing a raft from logs took them a whole day. So it was sunset before they could start rafting their way across the river.
Using poles made from branches, Gist and Washington set out into the Allegheny River. But crossing the river quickly proves difficult as their makeshift raft is caught up in the treacherous downstream current.
The problem was this freezing cold river running very swiftly.
And the river at this stage was choked with fast-moving ice flows.
Washington has never been in situations like this. He's not understanding the power of the river and the cold and the forces out here.
When the ice floe connected with his setting pole, the impact was enough to knock him off balance.
Next thing he knows, he's in 10 feet of freezing water.
Take my hand! Major Washington!
Gist pulls Washington from the icy river, saving his life. But the danger isn't over. The raft is being swept downriver. And with their poles washed away, they have no way to control it.
There!
Fortunately, there was a small island exposed in the middle of the river.
They've escaped the freezing river, but now they're stranded, and the temperature is dropping.
George Washington is soaked from head to toe. He could probably barely stand up.
The future father of the country is in fact in danger of freezing to death.
Gist is not that much better. His toes and fingers are probably frostbitten, and so they need to find some way to survive through the night.
Their hands are frozen, almost useless at that point. Gist tries to start a fire using flint and steel. It's the classic way, but to no avail. His fingers just aren't working the way he needs them to.
And George Washington will die if they don't get a fire going fast.
After a disastrous mishap on the icy Allegheny River, Major George Washington and frontiersman Christopher Gist are in danger of freezing to death.
For George Washington and Christopher Gist, a fire at that moment was their number one priority. And if that fire doesn't get started, you can imagine how history changes.
With flint and steel failing, Gist's last hope is, literally, a shot in the dark.
When he's not able to start a fire the traditional way, he resorts to an old frontier trick, using his musket by putting a piece of cloth into the firing pan, so that when you fired the gun, you would get a spark that instead of igniting the gunpowder, would ignite the cloth, and in turn, boom, fire.
he suffered mightily with his frozen fingers to get this fire going to save George Washington. But they got a good fire going, and they managed to survive the night.
We should get some sleep. Need to build a new raft in the morning.
Without the fire, it's likely that Washington probably would have died of hypothermia.
I think this is the moment that really cemented their friendship, at least for Washington, because this man saved my life, risking his life.
The next morning, Gist awakens to a welcome sight.
They saw that the river had frozen across to the far side, and suddenly they realized they were saved.
I should think that I was dreaming.
If you are, do not open your eyes until we are safely across.
They were able to walk off the island, going straight across it. That was one bit of luck they had.
2 months after setting out on their journey, Gist and Washington finally make it back, exhausted but alive.
If all goes well, I should make it to Williamsburg in 10 days' time.
Perhaps fewer. 4 legs will serve you better than 2.
Indeed.
Here they separate. Gist to return to his family, and Washington to deliver the message to the governor in Williamsburg.
I shall be informing Governor Dinwiddie of your exemplary work on his behalf. England owes you a great debt.
It's an honor, Major.
I, however, owe you an even greater one. My very life. I shall never forget what you have done.
Washington, of course, parting ways with the man who was literally responsible for keeping him alive on multiple occasions.
You should ever need me. I'll always be at your service.
I suspect that day may be sooner than you think.
The hardships that Washington encountered in company with Christopher Gist were a kind of a definitive moment in his life, because by overcoming them, it gave him a sense of what he could achieve.
He may not know it yet, but Christopher Gist has played a crucial role in American history, and it won't be his last.
Christopher Gist really embodied the expansion of colonial America. It was really, in many ways, the point of a spear of westward expansion into the Ohio River Valley.
His time with Washington overshadows so much of who Gist was. But Gist went into the unknown in a way that very few people had done in that era.
Gist is the first person to describe the Ohio Territory for British colonists in North America. And these descriptions and surveys are a really critical part of convincing people to move west.
While his name may not resonate like Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett, it should. He serves as a doorway to open the region for almost everyone else who comes after him.